Blood in Silver Valley. The crack of gunfire echoed through the canyon as a bullet ricocheted off the boulder inches from Jack Colton's face, sending stone fragments stinging against his cheek. Sweat trickled down his brow despite the cool night air. 4 armed men had him pinned down, and his ammunition was running low. "One bullet for each bastard, but there's 4 of them. This might be my last stand," Jack muttered, bitterly remembering the ranch he'd built with his bare hands, log by painstaking log. As the gunman closed in, Jack thumbed back the hammer of his Colt. "Come on, then," he growled. "If I'm dying today, I'm taking company to hell." A whisper of movement caught Jack's attention from the ridge above, a silhouette against the moonlight. An arrow sliced through the darkness, finding its mark in the shoulder of the closest attacker. The man screamed, his pistol discharging harmlessly into the dirt. They say in this wild frontier, a man can only trust his gun. But that night in Silver Valley, I learned that sometimes your most unexpected ally can be your enemy's enemy. Jack Colton bolted upright in his bed, the nightmare still fresh in his mind. Faces of men he'd served with at Cold Harbor stared accusingly as gunfire erupted around them. His cotton shirt clung to his sweat-soaked chest as he tried to shake the memories away. 10 years had passed since that bloodbath in Virginia, but the dream still came, regular as clockwork. Jack glanced at the pocket watch on his nightstand. 3:17 a.m. He wouldn't find sleep again tonight. With practiced movements born from years of military discipline, Jack dressed in the dark, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and boots that had seen better days. From beneath his pillow, he retrieved his Colt Navy revolver, the same one his father had carried in the Mexican-American War. He checked the chambers before sliding it into his holster, the weight of it as familiar as his own heartbeat. The cabin was simple but sturdy, built log by log over the past 3 years on a small plot of land nestled against Silver Creek in Arizona territory. The stream's year-round flow was a rarity in this harsh landscape, making his homestead one of the most valuable pieces of property for miles. Outside, the night was clear, stars shimmering like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Jack's practiced eye swept across his small ranch, the corral where his 3 horses rested, the chicken coop silent in the darkness, the newly repaired fence line stretching toward the creek. A sound caught his attention, too deliberate to be an animal, too careful to be the wind. Jack froze, hand moving instinctively to his holster. Years of tracking for the Union Army had sharpened his senses to unnatural movement. Something, or someone, was circling his property. Keeping to the shadows, Jack followed the trail, noting displaced pebbles and bent grass stems. He read the signs like other men read books, the slight depression in the soil revealing a man's boot, heavier on the right foot than the left. The tracks led him in a circle around his cabin. When he completed the circuit, what he found chilled his blood more than any ghostly memory. A perfect ring of oil surrounded his entire homestead, stopping precisely 3 feet from any structure. In the moonlight, he could make out the dark liquid glistening on the parched earth. One match would have sent his entire life up in flames while he slept. "You won't find who you're looking for," came a woman's voice behind him. Jack spun, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion, the same motion that had saved his life a dozen times in the war. She stood at the edge of the clearing, so still she might have been part of the landscape itself. A woman with long black hair braided down her back, simple clothing adorned with small beads that caught the moonlight. Around her neck hung a cord with small stones. She was Apache, and she was watching him with eyes that seemed to pierce through to his soul. "Who the hell are you?" Jack demanded, not lowering his gun. "And what do you know about this?" "My name is Naya," she said calmly. "And I know that while you slept, men circled your home with oil, intending to burn you alive. I stopped them." Jack studied her face for any sign of deception. employing the same scrutiny that had once identified Confederate spies. "Why would you help me?" "They've done this before," Naya replied. "6 ranches in 3 years. Always the same. Fire in the night, families burning in their beds. No survivors, no questions. Just land changing hands for pennies on the dollar. And you expect me to believe you just happened to be here to stop it?" Jack's trigger finger remained tense. Something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, but recognition. "Not by chance, Jack Colton. I've been tracking these men for years." She held out a piece of charred wood with strange markings carved into it. "Their signature. I found it after they fled." Jack hesitated, then took the wood. The markings meant nothing to him, but the implications were clear enough. "You still haven't said why you helped me." Naya's gaze was steady. 3 years ago, after the first fire, someone left food for me when I was hiding in the hills. Good food, not scraps. For 3 nights. I never saw who it was, but I found a name written on a piece of paper on the 3rd night. Jack's breath caught as a memory surfaced. A young Apache woman, injured and afraid, glimpsed through the trees while he was riding fence for Judge Garrett shortly after arriving in the territory. He'd left food without ever approaching, never demanding thanks or explanations. And on the 3rd night, on a whim he couldn't explain, he left his real name written on a scrap of paper. "That was you," he said quietly, lowering his weapon slightly. Their eyes met in silent understanding, but the moment was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching horses. Naya's expression hardened. "They've found me, and now they know you're still alive." She touched his arm briefly, the first human contact he'd felt in months, then melted into the darkness with surprising speed. "They'll be back, Colton. Next time I might not be here to stop them." Dawn broke with the promise of another scorching day. Jack hadn't returned to bed after Naya's departure, spending the hours until sunrise inspecting the oil-soaked earth that ringed his property. Who would want him dead, and why? By mid-morning, he was riding toward the largest neighboring ranch, owned by Howard Garrett, a former federal judge who'd retired to Arizona 5 years earlier. If anyone would have insight into local grudges, it would be Garrett. The old judge was in his yard when Jack arrived, giving instructions to a group of ranch hands. Tall and weathered with a shock of white hair, Garrett had the bearing of a man accustomed to respect and the calloused hands of someone who worked alongside his men. "Sullivan," he called, using the false name Jack had adopted. "Heard you had some trouble at your place last night." Jack dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post. "News travels fast." "It does when smoke can be seen for miles." Garrett studied him closely. "Though you don't look like a man who's been in a fire." "There wasn't one. Someone laid oil around my entire property, but they were interrupted." Jack's voice hardened. "And I aim to find out who." "Inside," Garrett said, nodding toward the house. "This isn't a conversation for the yard." Garrett's study was cool and comfortable, walls lined with legal books and a desk that dominated the space. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to Jack. "There's talk about you in town, Sullivan," he said without preamble. "Where you came from, why you keep to yourself. Some folks don't like mysteries." "I'm not bothering anyone," Jack replied flatly, then removed the carved piece of wood from his pocket. "Recognize these markings?" Garrett took the wood, studying it in silence for a long moment. His expression darkened as he traced the symbols with his thumb. "Where did you get this?" "It was left near my property last night. Mean something to you?" Garrett set his glass down with enough force that whiskey sloshed over the rim. 3 years ago, the Miller place burned down. Family of 5, all dead in their sleep. Sheriff called it an accident, but I found this exact symbol carved into wood in the ashes. Jack felt his stomach tighten. "You think it was deliberate?" "I know it was." Garrett's voice hardened. "And that wasn't the only one. The Patterson place a year later. Rodriguez family 6 months after that. All burned in the night, all with the same markings found nearby. And nobody's investigated? Garrett's laugh was bitter. Sheriff Wilkins couldn't find his ass with both hands and a map. Besides, there's something else. He paused, moving to a map of the territory pinned to his wall. See this creek running through your land? Follows the same path through the Miller property, Patterson's place, and the Rodriguez land. Silver Creek, Jack said, moving to stand beside him. And after each fire, Garrett continued, Victor Thornton bought the land for next to nothing from grieving relatives. Thornton? The mercantile owner. The same. Richest man in the county now, and getting richer. Garrett traced the creek with his finger. And he's been buying up every piece of property along this water. But why? Water's valuable out here, but there's more to it. Garrett turned to face Jack. There's also been talk about an Apache woman spotted near the eastern ridge. Young woman traveling alone. That mean anything to you? Jack kept his face expressionless. Years of poker games serving him well. Should it? Folks get nervous when they see an Apache wandering around. Start thinking about property lines and old disputes. She's not on my land. Garrett's gaze sharpened. But she was. It wasn't a question. Jack said nothing, but his silence was confirmation enough. Listen, Sullivan, I'm not here to judge, but whatever happened at your place last night, it's going to draw attention you don't want. And if people connect you with that Apache woman, it'll get worse. Jack stood to leave. I appreciate the warning. One more thing, Garrett called as Jack reached the door. There's a government land agent in town, Captain Marcus Rhodes. Been asking questions about water rights, particularly along Silver Creek. Jack froze at the name, his hand tightening on the doorknob until his knuckles whitened. Marcus Rhodes, his former commanding officer during the war, the man who had falsely accused him of betrayal and desertion, the reason he'd spent 10 years living under a false name. You all right, Sullivan? You look like you've seen a ghost. Just tired, Jack managed, forcing his voice to remain steady. Didn't sleep much last night. As he rode back to his ranch, Jack's mind raced. Rhodes in town, asking about land along Silver Creek, and someone trying to burn him out. It couldn't be coincidence. But how had Rhodes found him after all these years? By the time Jack's cabin came into view, thick black smoke was already billowing into the sky. He spurred his horse forward, heart pounding. The barn was fully engulfed, flames licking hungrily at the dry timber. The corral fence had been broken down, his horses nowhere in sight. No! Jack shouted, leaping from his mount. Without hesitation, he charged toward the inferno, arm raised against the blistering heat. Inside that barn was the last photograph of his family, tucked inside his father's old Bible, the only connection to his past life. The heat hit him like a physical wall as he ducked under a burning beam. Smoke filled his lungs, making each breath agony. Blindly, he reached the small shelf where he kept the Bible, fingers closing around leather just as a burning support beam crashed down behind him, blocking his exit. Clutching the Bible to his chest, Jack kicked through the rear wall, wood splintering under his boot. He tumbled out into the yard, gasping for air, his shirt smoldering. As Jack staggered to his feet, movement caught his eye. 3 riders disappearing over the ridge. He drew his revolver, but they were already out of range. From behind a water trough, an arrow sliced through the air, narrowly missing his shoulder. Jack dove for cover, rolling behind a stack of firewood. Naya! He shouted, recognizing the fletching on the arrow. It's me! The Apache woman emerged from behind the trough, bow still drawn. I thought you were one of them returning. What happened? They came back in force. I tried to stop them, but there were too many. Her eyes reflected the flames as she looked at the burning barn. I managed to free your horses before they could shoot them. Jack holstered his weapon, surveying the destruction. The cabin still stood, but the barn was a total loss. Did you recognize any of them? Seth Thornton was leading them. The one with the scar. She touched her cheek, indicating a mark that matched the disfigurement on the mercantile owner's brother. Jack's jaw tightened. You've been tracking these men for 3 years. Tell me everything you know. They took shelter in a cave in the eastern hills as night fell. Naya built a small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. She knelt beside Jack, examining the burn on his arm, where his shirt had caught fire. This will help, she said, applying a poultice of crushed herbs to the angry red skin. Her touch was gentle but sure. Speaking of years of healing experience, where did you learn that? Jack asked, watching her work. My grandfather was a healer. Her eyes remained focused on his wound. He taught me which plants to gather, how to prepare them. The cave fell silent as she wrapped a clean cloth around his arm. When she finished, their eyes met briefly before she returned to the fire. Tell me about the first fire, Jack said, breaking the silence. Naya sat back on her heels, staring into the flames. I was gathering herbs near the Miller place when I smelled smoke. By the time I reached their cabin, the whole thing was burning. Pain crossed her face. I could hear them screaming inside. You couldn't have saved them, Jack said quietly. I know that now. I was just a girl then, only 19. She stared into the flames. 2 weeks before the fire, Victor Thornton had offered to buy their land. Mr. Miller refused. He told Thornton that the creek on his property had special meaning to him. His children played there every day. And after the fire, Thornton bought the land from Miller's brother in Pennsylvania for almost nothing. Same pattern with every fire since. Always properties along Silver Creek. But why? What makes that land so valuable? Naya reached for her medicine pouch, extracting a small vial of water. This creek has been sacred to my people for generations. The waters have healing properties, minerals that ease pain, speed healing. She held the vial up to the firelight, where it seemed to shimmer with an unusual iridescence. 2 summers ago, white men came with instruments. They tested the soil and water, found something valuable. Silver, Jack realized aloud, the creek's name suddenly taking on new meaning. The whole valley is rich with it. That's why Thornton wants control of the creek. Not just water rights, but mining rights too. Yes, with the deeds to all the properties along the creek, he controls everything. The water, the minerals, the future of the valley. Jack ran a hand through his hair. And now Rhodes is involved, using his position as a federal land agent to help Thornton secure the claims legally. Naya studied him. You know this Rhodes. I served under him during the war, at Cold Harbor. Jack's voice grew distant, his eyes seeing something far beyond the cave walls. He ordered my unit to hold an exposed position during the battle. It was suicide. When I ordered a retreat to save my men, he accused me of cowardice and desertion. Said I leaked information to the enemy that got men killed. Jack's fist clenched, the old rage flaring. It was a lie, but who would believe a lieutenant over a captain? So you ran. I ran, changed my name, tried to build a new life. Jack's laugh was bitter. And now he's found me again. Naya moved to sit beside him, her shoulder touching his. A small gesture of solidarity that carried more comfort than words could. Then we fight back, together. Jack looked at her, this woman warrior who had suffered her own losses, yet hadn't surrendered to bitterness. Something stirred in him that he'd thought long dead. Hope. Together, he agreed, and in that moment, the decision felt like coming home after a long journey. The town of Redemption Falls was busier than usual when Jack and Naya arrived the following evening. They had formulated a plan. While Jack created a distraction in the street, Naya would infiltrate Thornton's office above the mercantile to search for evidence of the land scheme. Jack entered town alone, Naya slipping in through the eastern edge to avoid notice. He tied his horse outside the saloon, pulled his hat low over his eyes, and moved casually toward the center of town. Thornton's Mercantile stood imposingly on the main street, light burning in the second-floor windows. His opportunity came when a ranch hand led a string of horses down the main street. Jack waited until they passed the saloon, then tossed a small firecracker under the lead horse's hooves, a trick he learned from a Chinese railroad worker years back. The explosion was minor, but enough to spook the animals. The horses reared and bolted, breaking free from their handler and scattering in all directions. In the ensuing chaos, men shouting, horses galloping, people diving for safety. Jack spotted Naya moving swiftly along the side of Thornton's building toward the external staircase. Their eyes met briefly across the street, a moment of connection before they both continued with their parts of the plan. While townspeople scrambled to catch the loose horses, Jack circled around to the rear of the Mercantile. A service entrance led to a back staircase, locked but not for long. With two thin metal picks he'd fashioned from cavalry boot spurs, Jack worked the lock with precision, feeling each tumbler click into place with the sensitivity of a safecracker. A skill learned from a former Confederate prisoner who'd shown him the technique during a long winter's captivity. The interior staircase was pitch black, and he moved cautiously, feeling his way upward step by step. At the top, he found himself in a narrow hallway with 3 doors. Light showed beneath the one at the far end. Thornton's office. From inside, he could hear voices, a man and a woman, arguing in hushed but heated tones. Jack pressed his ear to the door, his breathing shallow and controlled. "Told you to be more careful," a woman was saying. "The whole town is talking about the Sullivan place burning. They're saying he survived." "Let them talk," Victor Thornton replied dismissively. "Sullivan is probably dead in the hills by now. And if not, he soon will be. You can't afford assumptions. Not now." The woman's voice grew sharper. "Rhodes says the final papers will be ready next week. We need to maintain appearances until then." "Everything is under control, Eleanor," Thornton said in a placating tone. "Once the documents are processed, the entire watershed will be legally mine. Then we can stop pretending to be respectable shopkeepers and live like we deserve." Jack heard movement inside the room, footsteps approaching the door. He quickly retreated down the hall, pressing himself into a shadowed alcove as the door opened. A tall, elegantly dressed woman with graying blonde hair, pinned severely atop her head, emerged. Eleanor Thornton, Victor's wife. She closed the door behind her and walked briskly down the hall, disappearing through another door without noticing Jack's presence. From somewhere nearby came a soft tapping sound. 3 quick taps followed by 2 slower ones, the signal he and Naya had arranged. She was in position at the window. Jack tested the office door handle gently. Locked. He knelt, tools in hand, working the mechanism as silently as possible. Within moments, he felt the satisfying click of the tumblers aligning. Slowly, he turned the handle and eased the door open just enough to peer inside. Victor Thornton sat at a large desk, his back to the door, examining papers by lamplight. On the far side of the room, a window was partially open, Naya's entry point. As Jack watched, a shadow moved across the sill. Thornton, engrossed in his documents, didn't notice the slight movement of the curtains as Naya slipped into the room with the silence of a ghost. She crouched behind a bookcase, her eyes meeting Jack's across the room. Jack gave a slight nod and pushed the door fully open, stepping inside with his revolver drawn. "Don't move, Thornton," he said quietly. The merchant froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Sullivan," he said, his voice betraying only mild surprise as he turned in his chair. "You're supposed to be dead." "Disappointed?" "Merely inconvenienced." Thornton's eyes flicked toward a drawer in his desk. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Jack warned. "Naya, check that drawer. He's probably got a gun in there." Thornton's composure cracked slightly as Naya emerged from her hiding place. "You!" he hissed. "I should have known." Naya said nothing as she moved to the desk and opened the drawer, removing a small Derringer pistol. She pocketed it and began searching the other drawers. "You're making a mistake," Thornton said, his voice dropping to a persuasive tone. "Whatever you think you know, I can explain. This is all a misunderstanding." "Save it," Jack replied coldly. "We know everything about the fires, the land deals, the silver mine. We know about Captain Rhodes, too." Something flashed in Thornton's eyes at the mention of Rhodes, a mixture of surprise and calculation. "Then you know you're in over your head, Sullivan. Or should I call you Lieutenant Reynolds?" Jack tensed at the use of his real name. So Rhodes did recognize me. "He was quite surprised to discover you living out here," Thornton confirmed with a smug smile. "The deserter who got his men killed, hiding in plain sight, he's been looking forward to a reunion." "I didn't desert," Jack said, his voice hard. "And I didn't get those men killed. Rhodes did with his suicidal orders. Then he blamed me to cover his own failure." Thornton shrugged. "That's not how he tells it." "Where's the safe, Victor?" Jack demanded, ignoring the bait. "The safe where you keep the deeds to the properties you've stolen, the forged documents, the proof of your crimes." A slow, calculating smile spread across Thornton's face. "You're hoping to find evidence, expose our operation? How noble." He laughed softly. "But you're too late. Those documents aren't here." "He's lying," Naya said, continuing to search the office. "The safe is here somewhere." "Look all you want," Thornton said, leaning back in his chair with newfound confidence. "You won't find anything. Rhodes took everything to his hotel room for safekeeping. By tomorrow, the papers will be filed with the Territorial Land Office, and everything will be perfectly legal." Jack exchanged a glance with Naya. If what Thornton was saying was true, they needed to change plans immediately. But there was also a good chance he was lying to protect the documents. "Keep searching," Jack instructed her. "You know, Sullivan," Thornton said conversationally, as if they were having a social visit. "I almost admire your persistence. Most men would have given up long ago or died trying. But you and the Apache girl, you're different. Stubborn." His eyes hardened. "Foolish." "We're not the ones who murdered families in their sleep," Jack replied. "How many children died in those fires, Thornton? How many lives destroyed so you could get rich?" "Progress always has casualties," Thornton said dismissively. "You think the railroads were built without blood? The cities? The mines? This country was built on the backs of the expendable." "Found it," Naya announced suddenly. Jack glanced over to see her kneeling beside a section of floorboards that had been revealed beneath an ornate rug. A trapdoor was set into the floor, secured with a heavy padlock. Thornton's confident smile faltered. "Shut up!" Jack cut him off. "Naya, can you open it?" She was already working on the lock with the small tools Jack had given her earlier. "I need a few minutes." "We don't have a few minutes," Jack replied tensely. "Someone could come in at any—" The door behind him burst open. Jack spun, but too late. A powerful blow caught him in the back of the head, sending him staggering forward as his revolver clattered to the floor. Through blurred vision, he saw Seth Thornton's scarred face, grinning wickedly as he raised a sawed-off shotgun. "Well, well," Seth drawled. "Look what the cat dragged in." Victor Thornton stood from his desk, straightening his vest with a satisfied expression. "Perfect timing, brother. Our guests were just about to overstay their welcome." Naya had risen from the floor, her back against the wall, eyes darting between the two Thorntons and Jack, who was struggling to stay on his feet, the room spinning around him from the blow. "Now then," Victor said, retrieving Jack's revolver from the floor. "I believe we were discussing evidence." Seth reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document, which he tossed onto the desk. "Special delivery from Captain Rhodes," he announced with malicious glee. "A wanted poster for one Lieutenant Jack Reynolds, deserter and traitor." Victor unfolded the paper, turning it so Jack could see. Sure enough, there was a crude drawing of his face, younger but recognizable, with the words, "Wanted for desertion and treason," printed in bold letters beneath it. Rhodes has been carrying this for years, Victor explained. Imagine his delight when I confirmed his suspicions about you. Enough talk, Seth interrupted impatiently, raising the shotgun. Let's finish this. The Indian first. He swung the weapon toward Naya, but Jack lunged forward with the last of his strength, crashing into Seth's arm just as the shotgun discharged. The blast went wide, splintering a bookcase instead of Naya. The room erupted into chaos. Victor shouted in alarm as Jack and Seth struggled for the shotgun. Naya seized the moment to dive across the room, tackling Victor before he could raise Jack's revolver. Jack's head throbbed with blinding pain as he grappled with the stronger man. Seth drove a knee into his stomach, then slammed the butt of the shotgun against his jaw. Jack felt something crack, tasted blood. The world began to dim at the edges. Across the room, Naya was holding her own against Victor, who had underestimated her strength and skill. She blocked his attempt to aim the revolver and delivered a sharp strike to his throat that left him gasping. The sound of running footsteps in the hallway signaled that the gunshot had been heard. They had seconds before more people arrived. "Seth!" Victor wheezed, still struggling with Naya. "The window!" Seth glanced toward the open window, understanding dawning in his eyes. With a vicious shove, he sent Jack crashing into the desk, then leveled the shotgun at him. "End of the line, deserter," he snarled. The window behind him shattered inward as a figure crashed through it, sending glass shards flying in all directions. Seth whirled in surprise, the shotgun swinging wildly toward this new threat. Jack blinked through the haze of pain, not believing what he was seeing. The man who had come through the window was dressed in the dusty clothes of a ranch hand, but his face, older, scarred, but unmistakable, belonged to Mike Lawson, a soldier from Jack's unit, who had supposedly died at Cold Harbor. "Lawson!" Jack choked out, certain he was hallucinating. Lawson barreled into Seth before he could fire, driving him backward into a wall with bone-crushing force. The shotgun discharged again, blasting a hole in the ceiling and filling the room with plaster dust. Victor had managed to break free from Naya and was raising the revolver once more, this time aiming directly at Jack's head. "Damn you all!" he shouted, finger tightening on the trigger. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Victor's gun. The mercantile owner jerked backward, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. He looked down in confusion, then collapsed to his knees before toppling forward onto his face. In the doorway stood Howard Garrett, a smoking rifle in his hands. "Figured you might need that backup after all, Sullivan," he said grimly. Jack struggled to his feet, trying to make sense of what was happening. Lawson and Seth were still locked in combat, crashing into furniture as they fought for control of the shotgun. Naya had retrieved the Derringer from her pocket and was covering Victor's motionless form. "Garrett," Jack managed, his voice rough with pain. "How did you—" "Followed you into town," the rancher explained, stepping into the room. "Good thing, too." He glanced at Lawson, who had finally subdued Seth with a powerful blow that left the scarred man unconscious. "Friend of yours?" Before Jack could answer, shouts and footsteps on the stairs announced more arrivals. "Sheriff's coming," Garrett warned, "and I imagine Rhodes won't be far behind." Lawson moved quickly to the trap door Naya had discovered. With a few deft movements, he broke the padlock with the butt of the shotgun and flung the door open, revealing a small safe built into the floor. "The combination is Eleanor's birthday," he said to Jack. "August 17th, 1827. Thornton wasn't very creative." Jack stared at him in disbelief. "Lawson, how are you?" "Later," Lawson cut him off urgently. "Get the documents now before Rhodes arrives." Naya was already kneeling beside the safe, spinning the dial with quick, sure movements. The mechanism clicked and she pulled the door open, revealing stacks of papers and several leather-bound ledgers. This is it, she confirmed, quickly gathering the documents. Everything we need. Garrett had taken up position at the doorway, rifle ready. Time to go, he announced tensely. I'll hold them off. Meet me at my ranch. Jack hesitated, looking at Victor Thornton's body in the unconscious form of Seth. What about them? Victor's dead, Garrett said flatly. Seth will face justice for his crimes. Now move. Lawson grabbed Jack's arm. This way, he said, leading him toward the window he'd crashed through earlier. There's a wagon below. Naya, you go first. Naya clutched the precious documents to her chest and climbed through the broken window onto a narrow ledge. Jack saw her drop down into darkness, followed by the soft thud of her landing. Your turn, Lieutenant, Lawson said, using Jack's old rank with a hint of dry humor. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. You knew the truth, he realized. All this time, you knew I didn't betray the unit. Lawson's expression sobered. I knew, but Rhodes made sure I couldn't tell anyone until now. He gestured toward the window. Go. I'll explain everything when we're safe. The sound of arguing voices and heavy footsteps grew louder in the hallway. Jack clasped Lawson's shoulder briefly, then climbed through the window. The drop was about 10 feet to a wagon filled with hay positioned directly below. Naya was already in the driver's seat, reins in hand. As Jack landed in the hay, pain shooting through his injured head, he looked up to see Lawson silhouetted in the window. A moment later, his former comrade followed him down, landing with surprising agility for a man of his age and build. Drive, Lawson commanded, and Naya snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, wheels clattering on the packed dirt of the alley as they fled into the night, leaving behind the sound of shouting and confusion. Head east, Lawson directed as they reached the edge of town. We need to warn your people. Rhodes won't wait now that we've exposed him. Naya's expression hardened, and she urged the horses to greater speed. The night air was cool against Jack's face as the wagon bounced along the rough trail leading toward the eastern hills. Behind them, Redemption Falls receded into darkness, only a few lights still visible in the distance. How are you alive, Lawson? Jack finally asked, turning to the man who had materialized like a ghost from his past. In the dim starlight, Jack could see the deep scar that ran from Lawson's temple to jaw, a wound that hadn't been there during the war. The man's once bright eyes now carried shadows of hard experience, and gray streaked his dark hair despite his relatively young age. I survived Cold Harbor, Lawson replied, his voice rough with memory. Barely. Took a Confederate bullet in the chest, but it hit my pocket watch. Your gift, remember? The one you gave me after Chancellorsville. He pulled a dented silver timepiece from his vest. Still keeps terrible time, but it saved my life. Knocked me unconscious, though. By the time I came to, the battle was over, and I was on a stretcher headed for a field hospital. Rhodes told everyone you were dead. That's because he thought I was. By the time he learned different, I was already being shipped to a hospital in Washington. Lawson's face darkened. That's when he started spreading the story about you being a traitor. Said you'd leaked information to the enemy about our position, led us into an ambush. But you knew that wasn't true. I was there, wasn't I? I saw you trying to save what was left of the company after Rhodes ordered us to hold that suicide position. Lawson's voice hardened. When I tried to speak up, tell what really happened, suddenly I was transferred to a remote post in Dakota Territory. Message was clear enough. How did you end up here? Naya asked, keeping her eyes on the trail ahead. Wound up in Tucson after my discharge, looking for work. Heard about good pay for special jobs from a man representing Victor Thornton. Didn't ask too many questions at first. Shame darkened Lawson's features. By the time I realized what I'd signed up for, I was already in too deep. The fires, Jack said quietly. Lawson nodded, unable to meet Jack's eyes. not the Millers. That happened before I arrived. But the Patterson place, the Rodriguez homestead. His voice faltered. My hands helped build those fires. Jack studied his old friend's face. The man he'd known would never have willingly participated in murdering innocents. What changed? Saw the Rodriguez children the day before, Lawson said, staring into the distance. Playing by the creek, laughing, reminded me of my sister's kids back in Ohio. Something broke inside me. I couldn't do it anymore. So you warned them? Naya guessed. Tried to. Seth caught me. The fight that followed gave me this. He gestured to the scar on his face. They dumped what they thought was my corpse in a ravine outside town. And instead I found you, Naya finished, exchanging a brief glance with him. She saved more than my life, Lawson said, looking at Jack. She gave me purpose again. After she healed my wounds, I offered the only thing of value I had. Everything I knew about Thornton's operation. We've been working together since, gathering what we needed to bring them to justice. What about Rhodes? Jack asked, returning to his most pressing concern. How does he fit into all this? Showed up about a month ago. At first I thought it was coincidence. What were the odds he'd come to this particular territory? But then I saw him meeting with Thornton. They knew each other, and not casually. Lawson leaned forward, lowering his voice so there was no one to overhear them. Rhodes represents a group of investors from Washington. They've discovered a silver deposit under the creek that runs through your land and the surrounding area. Richest vein in the territory. But the land is already claimed by settler, Jack said. And by the Apache, Naya added from the front of the wagon. The eastern portion of the creek flows through land that was promised to my people in the Treaty of 1865. Treaties and deeds don't matter much to men like Rhodes and Thornton, Lawson said grimly. Not when there's silver involved. They've been systematically clearing the land, burning out settlers, driving off Apache families, creating a clear path for their mining operation. Jack gestured to the documents between them. And these papers prove it. Every last bit of it, Lawson confirmed. Thornton kept detailed records, forged bills of sale for properties acquired after fires, correspondence with Rhodes and his investors, payouts to Seth and his men for their dirty work. He shook his head in disgust. Thornton was many things, but careless with documentation wasn't one of them. He wanted everything to look legitimate on paper. The wagon crested a small rise, and in the distance, Jack saw an orange glow lighting the horizon. No, Naya whispered, her voice tight with dread. She snapped the reins, urging the horses to greater speed. As they drew closer, the horrible truth became clear. The Apache settlement, a collection of perhaps 15 structures nestled against the base of a cliff, was ablaze. Even from a distance, they could hear shouts and the occasional crack of gunfire. We're too late, Lawson said grimly. No, Naya's voice was steel. There may still be survivors. She urged the wagon forward down the slope, her face set in determined lines. Jack drew his borrowed revolver as they approached, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The scene that greeted them was chaos. Men on horseback circled the burning settlement, torches leaving trails of light in the dim pre-dawn air. Some structures were fully engulfed in flames, while others were just beginning to burn. Figures darted between buildings, villagers trying to escape the conflagration while attackers pursued them. There, Naya pointed to a cluster of rocks at the eastern edge of the settlement. Several Apache villagers, mostly women and children, had taken refuge there, partially protected from both the flames and the attackers. Get to them, Jack directed. Lawson and I will try to draw off the riders. Naya hesitated, clearly torn between helping her people and joining the fight. Then she nodded sharply and veered the wagon toward the rocks, keeping low to present a smaller target. Jack and Lawson jumped from the wagon and approached the settlement from the opposite direction, hoping to divide the attacker's attention. As they drew closer, Jack recognized several of the mounted men as those who had accompanied Thornton and Seth the night before. And there, directing operations from horseback, was Captain Marcus Rhodes himself. The years had not been kind to Rhodes. His once imposing figure had grown soft with comfortable living, his dark hair now streaked with gray. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, devoid of empathy. "Remember," Jack cautioned Lawson, "we need him alive if possible. He's the key to proving the conspiracy." Lawson's expression suggested he might have other preferences, but he nodded in agreement. "I'll follow your lead, Lieutenant." They spurred forward, Jack firing 3 rapid shots into the air to attract attention. The sudden gunfire had the desired effect. The raiders turned as one, momentarily distracted from their victims. Rhodes's eyes widened in shock as he recognized Jack. "Reynolds!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the chaos of the burning settlement. "I should have known you'd be involved with these savages." "It's over, Rhodes," Jack called back, continuing to advance. "We have the documents, your partnership with Thornton, the murders, the land fraud, all of it. Judge Harmon will have the evidence by noon." A flash of uncertainty crossed Rhodes's face, quickly replaced by calculated fury. "Kill them," he ordered his men. "Kill them all." The raiders turned their attention from the Apache villagers to Jack and Lawson, several raising rifles to take aim. The 2 men split apart, presenting more difficult targets as they galloped between structures, drawing fire away from both Naya and the villagers. Jack ducked low over his horse's neck as bullets whizzed past. He returned fire when possible, aiming to wound rather than kill, wanting prisoners who could testify against Rhodes. Lawson was less restrained, his shotgun booming across the settlement as he engaged the raiders directly. Through the chaos, Jack caught glimpses of Naya reaching the sheltering rocks, helping villagers retreat further into the cliff face where they would be safer. A bullet grazed Jack's arm, tearing through his sleeve and leaving a burning trail across his skin. He hissed in pain but kept riding, circling back toward where he'd last seen Rhodes. The captain was no longer giving orders from a safe distance, but had retreated to the edge of the settlement, clearly preparing to flee now that the tide of battle had shifted. "Rhodes!" Jack shouted, spurring his horse directly toward the man. "Face me, you coward!" Rhodes wheeled his horse around, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. For a moment, their eyes locked across the distance, the betrayed and the betrayer, the scapegoat and the man who had sacrificed him. Then Rhodes drew and fired in one smooth motion. The bullet missed Jack by inches, close enough that he felt the displacement of air as it passed. Jack returned fire, his shot catching Rhodes's horse in the flank. The animal reared in pain and fear, nearly unseating its rider. Rhodes struggled to control his mount, giving Jack time to close the distance between them. As he neared, Jack leapt from his own horse, tackling Rhodes from the saddle. Both men crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs and dust. They rolled in the dirt, each struggling for advantage. Rhodes was heavier but softer, his years behind a desk evident. Jack landed a solid punch that split the captain's lip. "Not so easy when your opponent can fight back, is it?" Jack growled. Rhodes spat blood and launched a surprisingly quick counterpunch that caught Jack's already injured jaw. Stars exploded across Jack's vision, but he recovered in time to block the next blow. "Still quick, Reynolds?" Rhodes panted, blood trickling from his split lip. "But you're still going to hang." Jack pinned the older man, pressing the barrel of his revolver under Rhodes's chin. "Give me one reason not to pull this trigger," he snarled, a decade of rage and injustice boiling to the surface. "One reason why I shouldn't end you right here." Fear flickered in Rhodes's eyes, but his voice remained steady. "Because you're not a killer, Reynolds, not in cold blood. You never were." A twisted smile curved his lips. "That's why I chose you as the scapegoat." You were too damned honorable to fight back properly. The taunt struck deeper than any bullet could have. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger, every fiber of his being crying out for vengeance. This man had destroyed his life, his career, his honor, had forced him to become a shadow of himself, always running, always hiding. Jack, don't! Naya's voice cut through his rage like a knife through fog. He looked up to see her approaching, rifle in hand but not aimed. Behind her, several Apache villagers were helping others to safety away from the burning settlement. He deserves to die, Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, Naya agreed, coming to stand beside him. But you do not deserve to carry that death on your conscience. Not like this. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, her touch somehow both soft and strong. There are better ways to find justice. For a moment, Jack remained frozen, the revolver still pressed against Rhodes's throat. Then slowly he eased his finger off the trigger and rose to his feet, dragging Rhodes up with him. You're under arrest, Captain, he said, his voice steadier now, for murder, conspiracy, fraud, and whatever else Judge Harmon decides to charge you with. 3 days later, they received word that Rhodes had been taken into custody by the territorial marshal. Judge Harmon's message to Garrett was brief but clear. The evidence was overwhelming and justice would be served. Garrett would remain in the capital to testify, ensuring the full story would be heard. As for Eleanor Thornton, she had attempted to flee with a substantial amount of money from her husband's accounts, only to be apprehended at the stagecoach station. Her involvement in the conspiracy would ensure she faced her own day in court. Jack stood on the porch of Garrett's ranch house, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and reds. His body ached from the exertions of the past days. The wound on his arm throbbed beneath its bandage, and his mind was a whirlpool of thoughts and emotions. Footsteps approached, and Naya joined him at the railing, her profile illuminated by the dying light. She had washed the dust and soot from her face and changed into clean clothes borrowed from Mrs. Porter, Garrett's housekeeper, though they hung loosely on her slender frame. Your people are settled, Jack asked. She nodded. As well as can be expected, the wounds are being tended. Food has been provided. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Mrs. Porter was resistant at first, but she has a good heart beneath that stern exterior. They stood in comfortable silence for a time, watching the sun's final descent below the horizon. The first stars were just becoming visible in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. What happens now? Naya asked finally, her question encompassing far more than just the immediate future. Jack considered before answering. Garrett should reach Judge Harmon by tomorrow morning. Once the documents are reviewed, warrants will be issued. The territorial marshal will arrive within a few days to take Rhodes into custody. He paused. After that, there will be trials, testimonies, justice, I hope. And for you? When this is over, what then? Will you reclaim your true name? Your past? It was a question Jack had been asking himself throughout the long day. For 10 years, he had been running from who he was, building a life on the foundation of a lie. Now that the truth was emerging, what remained for him? I don't know, he admitted. Jack Colton is who I am now in many ways. Lieutenant Reynolds feels like someone else, someone from another lifetime. He shook his head. I'm not sure I can go back to being him, even with my name cleared. Perhaps you don't need to go back, Naya suggested quietly. Perhaps you can simply move forward, taking the best parts of both men with you. The wisdom in her words resonated with something deep inside him. Jack turned to face her fully, seeing not just the warrior who had fought at his side, but the woman whose strength and compassion had awakened something he'd thought long dead. And you? What will you do when this is over? Naya looked out over the darkening land. For 3 years, I've had only one purpose: to stop Thornton and his men from destroying more lives. I haven't thought beyond that. Her voice softened. My people have lost their homes again. They will need help rebuilding, finding a new place to belong. I've been thinking about that, Jack said, turning to face her. My land? What was my land before the fire? It sits on that creek. Good water. Good soil. He took a breath. What if we rebuilt there? Not just my ranch, but a place for your people too. A new beginning for all of us. Naya studied his face in the fading light, searching for something in his expression. You would do that? Share your land with Apache strangers? Not strangers, Jack corrected gently, reaching out to take her hand. Friends. People who have fought the same enemies, suffered the same losses. He paused, gathering his courage. And you're not a stranger to me, Naya. Not anymore. Something shifted in her eyes, a softening, a recognition of what remained unspoken between them. It would not be easy, she warned. There would be resistance from both sides, my people and yours. Nothing worth doing is easy, Jack replied. But I think it's possible. A place where two cultures could coexist, learn from each other, a symbol of what could be rather than what has been. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and spread it on the railing between them. A rough sketch of a settlement, Apache dwellings on one side, Western-style cabins on the other, and in the center, a common area where both communities would meet. We'll build it like this, he explained. Traditional Apache homes for the summer heat, cabins for winter protection, and in the middle, a place where we all gather, where our strengths combine. Naya studied the drawing, her fingers tracing the lines Jack had made. A worthy dream, she said finally, and one I would help build if that is truly what you wish. It is, Jack confirmed. More than anything. The last light faded from the sky, stars emerging in full brilliance above them. From inside the house came the sounds of life continuing, quiet conversations, the clatter of dishes as Mrs. Porter prepared the evening meal, the occasional laughter of children who, despite everything, had found reasons to smile. Jack's hand remained over Naya's on the sketch, their fingers intertwined, both of them shaped by hardship, both survivors. In the darkness, he felt rather than saw her smile. Then we will build it together, she said, her voice carrying the certainty of a promise, a new beginning from the ashes of what was lost. And in that moment, beneath the vast canopy of stars, Jack Colton felt the final pieces of his fractured self begin to heal. Not a return to who he had been, but a transformation into who he might become. A man who had stopped running, a man who had found, at last, something worth standing for. As the lights of Garrett's ranch twinkled behind them, Lawson approached, the moonlight catching the silver of his scars. Garrett's rider just returned, he announced. Judge Harmon has issued warrants for everyone involved. It's over. Not quite, Jack replied, his gaze meeting Naya's in the starlight. In some ways, it's just beginning. He looked out over the darkening valley, toward where his ranch had once stood, where a new community might rise. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be trials and testimonies, resistance and setbacks, the slow, difficult work of building something new from the ruins of the old. But for the first time in a decade, Jack faced the future not with dread, but with hope. Beside him stood a woman who had tracked killers across the territory to prevent more deaths, who had saved his life more than once, who understood loss and redemption as intimately as he did. Eleanor Thornton is still out there somewhere, Lawson reminded them, pulling a telegram from his pocket. Marshall lost her trail at the Arizona border. She has enough money to buy a small army of guns. Then I guess we're not finished yet, Jack said, a new resolve settling in his chest. The eastern horizon stretched before them, vast and promising. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, under the silver stars, a deserter, an Apache woman, and a man once left for dead stood united by a common purpose, in the shared belief that even in this harsh land, justice and redemption were possible. Fia Zhong, Matroy sap mok trin, thung long bak, an sang jiao tian sham, vao hao sung qua jak, roy jen quan mat jai seo qua lawson, va quai kung la joy mat kien quang qua naya. Bakon ngoi tung la ke thu quan hao, gio jai jung kan hao nhu, la chan quai kung yua kong li va keas. Sometimes, the road home is the one you have to build yourself,